Well, thanks everybody for coming out. I know the weather's kind of crap, but it's gonna be fun. So yeah, this is a talk on Svelte. Again, my name's Tom. Who here works with JavaScript every day? Okay, cool. So I think you'll find this entertaining, to say the least. Hopefully informative. Let's jump in. All right, so we're basically just going to go over, what is Svelte and why Svelte is a little bit different than some of the other JavaScript frameworks out there, like Angular, Vue. We'll look at some of the coding with Svelte and then jump in and do some demos. But first, just a quick message about JavaScript. You might be thinking to yourself, why do we need more JavaScript frameworks, right? And I get it. There's a lot out there. Surely, we have plenty of front-end frameworks to choose from now, but don't call me Shirley. There's a good reason for it. And there's been a lot released over the last decade. I think it's easy to make fun of JavaScript because it's not strongly typed, among other things. But there's a lot of other things that have happened in the last decade too, and they have to do with interfaces, right? We have smartphones, tablets, TV, smart registers, a lot of different machines with different screen sizes that solve different problems and basically work in different ways. So that said, the kind of debate between which framework is best, I think maybe doesn't serve us as well as which framework would be best for what we're trying to do. So, something I just wanted to mention. So what is Svelte? Well, for starters, it's an adjective. It means attractively or gracefully slender. It's also a front-end JavaScript framework. So let's look at where Svelte came from. And Svelte was forged in the heart of a dying star by a man named Rich Harris. Now, Rich is the graphics editor for the New York Times. Previously worked at The Guardian, the interactive team there. And he's responsible for other things too, not just Svelte. Something called React JS. And he also built the compiling tool that Svelte uses called Rollup. Did I mention he's a graphics editor for the New York Times? He's a busy guy, right? He uses JavaScript as a means to an end rather than a focal point. He's very passionate about the web and how people experience the web. Not just users either. Very passionate about how developers are experiencing development and are they able to build stuff quickly, efficiently, effectively, right? He's got daily deadlines, I imagine, and tough challenges to solve. And he's got a few excellent talks about Svelte and about web development. Very thoughtfully articulates, his motivations for building Svelte, and his passion for this stuff is pretty intoxicating, to say the least. I highly recommend both videos, but I think rethinking reactivity is the best place to start. Yeah. So, certainly heard the phrase, less is more. I think that's certainly true in software. And the key here is that less code means more software. And Svelte will notify you of dead code as well. So it kind of helps you to become a better programmer. I was actually at the library working on this talk when I hit a point where I wasn't sure which way I wanted to go. Went to the computer science section and just started looking at the books there. And I picked this one up, and I just started looking through the table of contents in the beginning. And I saw that one of the chapters was actually write less code. So I thought I would include that. And it speaks to one of the reasons why I like working with Svelte is because I feel like I'm a better developer using this framework. And while I agree that I think less code is probably better, as someone who doesn't currently work 8 to 5 in development, I wanted to point you to some benchmarks and some data to sort of borrow some credibility, right? You guys are wondering, who is this guy? Why is he telling me about this? So I just wanted to let us see how Svelte compares to some of the other frameworks out there that I'm sure you've heard of and probably work with every day. So this is the result of a 2019 State of JavaScript survey. Fun fact, RocDev's member Amelia Wattenberger actually did these graphics. And you'll notice Svelte is pretty close to React in terms of developer satisfaction. And it hasn't been around as long as React. It was also voted the most interesting framework in 2019 as well. And the least amount of awareness around it. So people are more aware of React and Vue more so than Svelte. And here's a performance benchmark from the 2019 Real World App Comparison of front-end frameworks. And basically, these numbers are based on a few things. Performance, so how long does the app take to show content? Size, how big is the app? So we'll only compare the size of the compiled JavaScript files. CSS is common to all variants, and that is downloaded from CDN. So the HTML is common to all variants. So it's really just the compiled JavaScript that they're comparing when they're comparing the size here. And also lines of code. So how many lines of code did the author need to create the real-world app based on the spec? Here's another similar sort of graphic to speaking to the size of it and what's needed. Excuse me. More. This one's from a place called Bundlephobia. And Bundlephobia basically just helps you understand performance costs, how big these bundles are. And this one's from the JavaScript framework benchmark. And it beat, if you will, other frameworks in the category of speed. So this is how you have just regular JS on the left there, and then Svelte, Vue, React, Angular, and across most metrics, same as here for starting up, time to paint type metrics, and memory allocation as well. So these alone are no reason to use Svelte. It's just a number, right? They don't tell the whole story. But like I said, I wanted to show you guys that across the industry, people are recognizing the benefits of using it. And in one of Rich Harris's more recent talks, there's a moment when he's reflecting on his previous talks. And he says that in the first talk, he focused on the small bundle size as the main selling point. And then in the next talk that he did, he had focused on the speed. And he thought that the speed of the applications that are built is the best part of Svelte. And in the most recent one, he's realizing that the main selling point is actually the developer's experience and how simple it is to build things. I took this screenshot about 11 o'clock last night. It's just over 30,000 stars on GitHub. So that's something. In terms of stars, popularity, how does it compare to some of the other frameworks? And right around, I think, April of 2019 is when Svelte 3 came out. It's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see it's got quite an uptick early 2019. All right. So, majority of the time, I tend to lean towards the person on the right here. More and more using Svelte, I feel like the guy on the left. And again, more memes because I think they're great. So what is Svelte? I'm going to give you the verbatim definition from the docs. Svelte is a tool for building fast web applications. It's similar to JavaScript frameworks such as React and Vue, which share a goal of making it easy to build slick, interactive user interfaces. But there's a crucial difference in that Svelte converts your app into ideal JavaScript at build time rather than interpreting your application's code at runtime. This means you don't pay the performance cost of the framework's abstractions, and you don't incur a penalty when the app first loads. So you can build your entire app with Svelte, or you can add it incrementally to an existing code base. You can also ship components as standalone packages that work anywhere without the overhead of a dependency of a conventional framework. Svelte is comprised of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Very similar feel to single file components that you would see in Vue.js, for those that are familiar with Vue. And here's just a quick reference I found on Medium from Samantha Ming about JavaScript. Looks like a lot of the room is familiar with that. And again, just the code that makes up Svelte components. Speaking of which, wow, that's difficult to read. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Do you want me to hit the light? Well, components are the building blocks of Svelte applications. They're written into .svelte files using a superset of HTML. All three sections, script, style, and the markup itself, are all optional. So you don't need all of them at once. And here's just a really dead simple hello world. You'll notice in the script tag, we're declaring a variable called world. I want cornflower blue for the color and styles. And then we're referencing that variable down in the h1 tag. So here is what Svelte is compiling that into. So you can see in the upper left, it's importing what's needed from the Svelte language. On the right-hand side, okay, it's taking that h1 and kind of creating another element inside of it, in which it brings the content into that. And then down in the bottom left is a class of app with Svelte component. So like I said, they're components, so you could have multiple instances of the same component all over the page if you wanted to. This is how that's achieved. And we talked about the import and export earlier. So that's how this is all being strapped together.
So is it your styles, your script, and the structure all in one file?
They're all in one file, yeah. So we're gonna get a better look at some of those component files in the demos and stuff. But I wanted to show you, this is what Svelte's actually doing with that component, right? It's taking that component with all those three sections and putting this out there. Unless you wanted to have a server-side rendered, right? So that's an option in the compiler if you wanted to render it server-side. You just turn that on basically, and this is what it would give you. Same hello world for a server-side rendered version of that component. and you'll notice it's importing what it needs from Svelte. And then it has a const for your CSS, calling that same variable name, right? And then referencing that down below with the SSR component.
So question on the prior slide.
Sure.
I don't see where it generated the CSS there, the cornflower blue. I mean, I see it referencing that Svelte dash, some kind of unique idea generated, but I don't see where the CSS itself is. Is that a separate file that it writes?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for catching that. Yeah. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast, too slow?
No, you're good.
Okay. So yeah, server-side rendered version of this, right? See how in the upper right-hand corner there it has CSS output and JS output? I just grabbed the JavaScript, so. And by now you're probably wondering, okay, how is that really different from what React does or what Vue does? I think this really illustrates it well, because in both cases you're building components, and where React is going to bring that into a virtual DOM, and then every time it changes, state changes, bring that in, updating the virtual DOM. Svelte is actually sending over native JavaScript that's updating the DOM directly as needed.
I have a question.
Sure.
Would you know how that's different from Vue?
How is this different from Vue?
Yeah, like if you were to put like the Vue form, design
I know that. That's a great question.
I think Vue still has a virtual DOM,
Does.
and Svelte doesn't.
Yeah, Vue doesn't compile. I know that. That's where Svelte is really unique in that it's a JavaScript compiler. But what I'm unsure of is how it looks at all the diffs in the DOM.
So does that affect two-way data binding in any way?
Does.
Because I thought that was one of the functions of the virtual DOM, is the user inputs something and it's binded to the variable in the back. And they can go both ways, two-way, do you know?
I know that there is binding. I don't know. I apologize. I don't really know how to compare React's binding with Svelte's
So
per
have
se.
you ever built something and been in a situation where you want the user to input something and have that binded to a variable in your code, but you also want to be able to change the variable in your code and have that change what the user sees, like an input number or something like that. Have you ever been in that situation?
I haven't.
Oh, okay.
No, I apologize.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
That's a great question, though.
I think that is something that's also from a little bit of reading I've done on that is like
Yeah.
the reactive
Yeah.
part of it is something that
Okay.
is good at. I don't
Yeah.
think it uses virtual DOM to do it, but
It doesn't. Yeah, it uses assignments.
So virtual
to do
DOM
that.
and two-way data binding are kind of two separate things, right? I mean, the virtual DOM is just a notion that you're going to paint the new state of what you think the DOM should look like,
Mm-hmm.
and then that gets reconciled against the current DOM, right? So
Mhm.
it's like, you'll say the new state of this thing is it's green, and it's bold, and it's italic, right? Or there's three elements. I'm gonna change the first one to green, the second one's gonna be blue, and the third one's gonna be yellow. Right?
Mhm.
But maybe two of those were already the correct color, right? So there's no reason to go into the DOM and change the color of the second two, because only the first one changed.
Got
Right.
you.
So
Okay.
what the virtual DOM is trying to do is do a shortcut and say, you know what, I'm not gonna go bug the browser and ask it to go reapply these changes, because the DOM's already in that state,
Oh, okay.
okay?
Yep.
But that doesn't have to do with whether it's accepting, you know.
So what's
user-
the advantage of not using?
the advantage? Well, that's, yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure what Svelte is doing in terms of how it's doing that reconciliation. But this is this is some of the differences that occur between, say, React and Angular, right? Or at least AngularJS, certainly, the earlier versions of Angular, right? Because if you told it to re-render that component, it would just go out there and update that whole component again, right? And all the DOM elements inside that component would get rewritten again. So React was the first one to come along and say, hey, we're going to create this virtual DOM, this buffer. Because most developers said this is really wasteful to go re-render all these components over and over and over again. It's really slow. So for years, we were drilled into our heads, don't do this, it's bad. And then the React team came along and said, yeah, go ahead, re-render everything, right? Which seemed kind of insane, but because of the virtual DOM, it actually took away that overhead, that performance penalty. Because in most of the time, only one or two small things in the DOM are actually changed.
Oh, okay.
Right, so that was the point behind it. So Svelte must internally have a different way of reconciling this, but I'm not sure what that is.
That was a very helpful explanation.
That was very helpful. So yeah, I mean, where React and Vue are bundling modules to load it to a virtual DOM, Svelte compiles the modules into ES syntax at build time. I'm going to reference Amelia Wattenberger again. I noticed on Twitter recently, she's tweeted about using Svelte. And if I can just borrow some credibility here, here's what she had to say. If you guys have never seen some of the stuff that she does, check out her page, wattenberger.com. Really amazing. The way that she can tell a story with data is impressive. Here's what she built. So basically, it's a website that helps visualize interoperability between JavaScript libraries and languages. And it's pretty fun. It's really interesting to see how some of the other languages and libraries would work within each other, that is. But yeah, like I said, I just thought I'd include that. She has a really nice phrase down here. A lot of people say, Svelte for sites and React for apps. So take that with a grain of salt, but pretty interesting. And so here's a pretty common thing in JavaScript, classes. How can we add and remove and update classes on objects with Svelte? And this is using the class directive. So we can use a conditional operator, ternary operator, to basically place an if statement to just easily toggle things on and off. And you can have a bunch of different toggles as well in that same vein. Let's definitely draw it back. And I think this is a great example of how Svelte kind of makes life easier for the developers and how it's trying to increase and enhance that developer's experience with stuff out of the box.
So for the on-click method, can you point to, instead of writing the function out in line, can you point to a method variable within your logic?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, definitely have that option. But yeah, we're going to get into the API and all the built-in features as we go. But let's start building something. So the REPL is like an online editor. It's a great way to start coding right away in the browser, and it's a nice kind of playful way to begin, really. And once you realize that all this stuff is based on components, you can actually save your REPLs. It becomes a little bit more interesting. It's actually a really good tool for debugging as well. And this is one example of Svelte helping you to be a better developer, I think. You can see here that Svelte has some non-breaking error messages, right? They just act as sort of a helpful hand when you're coding. And for me, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. It helps you while you're doing it, right? So instead of building, testing, going back, why is it not working? It's kind of giving you those hints along the way.
Is that part of the compiler or just special plugin you use for your IDE?
Well, yes, this is inside of the compile in the REPL, which is the compiler.
You would probably, when
But
you're
it-
running it in your command line, it would probably console that out, right? When it'll do a compile and then it'll give you some warnings probably.
I would imagine that it does. I don't actually know,
Okay.
so it's a great question too.
Is cornflower, can you actually use cornflower blue or is that a variable?
Yeah, that's what
No.
we call it.
That's a legit color.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
I had no idea. I thought you could just do like blue, white, black.
Yeah, you can do those.
Yeah.
There's
Rebecca Purple's the best one.
Rebecca Purple's solid choice. But yeah, so like I said, little things like that. It's kind of like the thing in your car that beeps if you don't have your seatbelt on. It's like you can still drive, but after a while it gets annoying. It's like, okay, whatever, you know. Does that in a couple different ways as well, not just with CSS selectors. But yeah, once you're ready to really start building and you want to move out of the REPL into something like VS Code or a different IDE, for that you'd clone the Svelte template. And the Git is a repository built by Rich Harris, creator of Svelte. And it's a project scaffolding utility. And the main purpose is to make copies of Git repos without all the Git commit history, which makes the process much quicker because you're not downloading the entire Git history. And the Svelte template basically gives us everything we need. But yeah, this is what the template gives you. You know, you guys are JavaScript developers, probably pretty familiar with what all these things are. So you know modules, public folder, the build, source, package.json. Instead of a webpack or yarn, you got a roll up config file. And after you do npm install or yarn to get all the bits installed, you can then npm run dev, get your server up and running, and boom, it works. That's it. So let's make a to-do list. We'll start by adding some to-dos. And you'll notice I just threw it in the app file here. It says let to-dos right into the script tag. This is an example of a single file component. It looks a lot like Vue, right? And next we'll need to display our to-dos. And we'll use what's referred to as an each block. So you could certainly write a statement for each, but Svelte has the syntax built in, which at first felt kind of funny to use syntax on top of JavaScript. Like, why not just do it? Then after you do it a few times, it kind of is really nice to just simply, you know what you need and it's right there. And I think it also makes it really readable as well. And then we'll also include an else clause, you know, in case we have nothing to do. Slim chance it's ever going to be used for me, but we'll put it there. And it's similar syntax. You can kind of just read that and get a good sense of what it's doing without much interpretation needed.
So the array is empty, what's else do you have to do?
Yeah, so Okay, so in the top, what it's doing is for each to-do, it's going to give you an li element with an h3 button, if you will, so that you can click on and off if it's done. Or an input button to click on and off if it's done. And then it's showing the to-do.task, which is the to-do item, in the h3. And if the to-do items is empty, say we didn't put anything in there, it's going to show you there's nothing to do. And with the Svelte extension and the Svelte plugin for ESLint, you have those reminders that I mentioned earlier. That, again, something that I just find really helpful. And we're going to do a quick pause. Can you guys tell I like memes?
I
Pretty
don't
fun.
even know what that means.
You don't know what that means?
It doesn't mean anything.
It means that I feel it's important at any rate not to take yourself too seriously. Here's a quick reminder of that. So, yeah. More on this later.
Sure. I
Um,
got questions.
so that's what we end up with after the frog and the snail. Is a little bit of a to-do list. And that's a bit ugly, to be honest. And there's no real way to know if something is complete or incomplete. So we're going to style that a bit. And I just kind of skip the style. It's marginally better. But we have a list of to-dos. We have a checkbox. We can see that ones that are checked are crossed out. And one thing we're missing is an input to add more things to do. So let's do that. And for our input, we're going to grab a nifty little piece from Svelte's website. I like it because instead of the add button, you just hit enter. Kind of clean. Kind of nice. And now that we have an input, we need an add function to take this input, put it in our list of to-dos. Again, we're going to lean on Svelte's docs to grab a function, and we'll help our function along the way. And so that UID function assigns a number, new number as an ID. And then
Is this in a Svelte file, or is this in some sort of enclosure in JavaScript somewhere? Where would this be done? I know you probably just do it in global namespace, but is it in an enclosure anywhere?
no, it's just in a Svelte file. So this would be a single file component. This would be in the script tag of a single file component. In fact, we can take a closer look at the code behind it in a bit. So we have this add function, and mentioned before about assignments. It's worth mentioning that the spread operator is used here, and for good reason.
I see you never started writing the talk.
No, pretty clear, right? Rearrange some stuff just for those purposes.
But at least you fed the dog.
Fed the dog, right? And so we're gonna test it out. I added some more to-dos just to make sure it's working. Still haven't started writing that talk though. So now we're gonna borrow another function to remove the things that we're done with. So we'll go in, we'll add a button, and we'll have to put that button into our each clause. So we want that button there for each to do. Which leaves us with this. And Here we go. We have a to-do list. You can add to-dos, mark them as complete, and you can delete it to-dos as well. Let's take a closer look at that though.
I actually had a question about the buttons.
Sure.
It looked like the value of the button did have text in it. It's just the red X.
The value of the button.
Yeah. Is it just the way the description worked? And if there's just text that's rendered red or
You mean it doesn't say change age? I don't remember. But
It's just the exclamation, right?
yeah. Okay.
And then Unicode character.
Oh, okay. I just never seen it.
Sorry. I thought I had pulled up here.
yeah.
So you're saying that's an emoji that the editor just rendered?
I didn't know you could read.
All the kids are using it.
Be careful committing those things to your making builds titles. Because it can break you.
Noted. But yeah, I mean, this is what that is.
No, red X.
You guys want to see what the command line looks like? It's kind of clean. Confusing myself.
For the one that's built into,
Oh, yeah, it would have been smarter, huh?
you just closed it a minute ago, so that's fine.
Good call. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
I need some avocados. Working still.
Yeah. Not yet.
Check box.
So this is what the code looks like. Any interest in seeing like what that's building? All right.
One thing it looks like bind : checked, that's that two-way binding we talked about before, so it's the to-do.complete is that both telling the checkbox whether it should render as checked or not, and then when you check it or uncheck it, it writes that value back to the data structure?
Exactly. So if it's truthy, right? It's keeping it. If it's not, it's flipping it.
I like your use of ligatures. The triple equals on line 75.
I do what I can. Yeah, exactly. Shh. I was impressing people for a minute there. Come on. Okay. So let's look at this bundle.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. It's got a bunch of different functions, as you can see.
So this is the Svelte output from your compile file?
Correct. Thank you. Yep. This is the output. So once you build it, you end up with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. And this is what that JavaScript file looks like. It's pretty big, but in comparison to loading an entire repository, pretty small.
Do you know what browsers this supports?
What browsers it supports?
Yeah, like how far back and like how you load it up?
Not too far, I don't think. I don't know definitively.
Well, this looks like
I don't
ES5.
think this is ES6.
Oh,
no.
There's no classes. in
Well,
there.
new set, but I guess
I
you
thought they
code
were
calling
classes.
those in the pre-compiled, but once it's compiled, like, I don't think there's anything there.
Is there TypeScript supports?
It's something that they're working on. I know that there's a group that meets, I think, almost exclusively in New York City called Svelte Society, and they had a meetup recently hosted at Microsoft. So that it seems promising. I know Rich Harris has mentioned once before that they want to get TypeScript involved. I believe the compiler is built with TypeScript, but doesn't output TypeScript or accept TypeScript as an input either.
IE 10 plus.
Thank you.
Can we see in here where the actual your app code was transpiled? Because these look like just a lot of like helper functions from that.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing where that complete variable is actually interpreted and see how it's done.
Towards the bottom.
If we can make partial fit.
Towards the bottom.
Seems like you can add in IE 9 support with a couple of extra libraries.
Injects.
Does that answer your question? 640 about the. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so it looks like it's when you check the checkbox, it's setting the to-do.complete to the value of whether the box is checked or not, and then it's running that invalidate function on the whole to-dos thing, so it realizes that you're changing a value inside that object, but you're not changing the reference to it, so maybe it's saying like, assume that this whole to-dos object needs to be re-rendered anywhere that it's used. That's,
Can you see
I
if
guess.
there's
Well, it's doing the same thing if you look in the add one, right, where you actually,
oh yeah, just
the spread out
invalidate.
is doing the invalidate on that too, so it's like whatever to use is on the left side of the equal sign, perhaps.
Well, not even like I guess to-do.complete equals, yeah, that's
Right.
the left side of the equal sign.
Are there any instances of the input change handler down below? Where was that being instantiated or being called? Can you see if there's any calls to that?
Say again.
Can you see if there's any calls to that?
Do a control F.
No, that's references.
Right click and then what?
Find references.
Go to reference.
I'm sorry. I don't know. I wish I was more well versed in ES6.
What is the function that this is?
Oh, where's the function of this? This code is in.
That's
Oh.
all.
Follow that white line on the left.
Instance.
And where's instance called?
Oh god.
Yeah, let's not do this. But that's kind of the bread and butter, I think, right there, everybody.
In it.
Now we know where to start when we can't do it ourselves.
But
I,
that's
li-
like,
I like to play with these files a lot more than the other ones, if it's not obvious to the group. I mean, come on. We each have our skills. Reading S6 is not one of them at the moment. It's not to say it won't ever be, but
Yeah. Well, it's a big generated file.
it is.
So I'm assuming with those source map files then, if you were to run your app and load up the Chrome debugger, you're actually going to see the Svelte file and be able to step through that in the Chrome debugger.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. Just hit the button. So you notice it gives it kind of goofy names for all these classes.
You don't want the sources tab, the source tab.
Their breakpoint and add.
Like on line 14,
Yeah. Well,
just click on the
on the
number.
yeah, now add one. Do it.
Over here?
Yeah. Good enough. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
On the
Where it says pause the breakpoint,
yeah
just above that, there's like a,
rainbow thing.
yeah,
Not that one. Don't hit that one.
that one.
Oh. Sure.
It went away. Where'd that thing go? No, where is it? There was this little bar thing over here. Where'd it go? Not that.
And the resume button is also on the
Yeah.
overlay.
Oh god, now it's over there.
Oh, because you gave it away.
Is that really what it did? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Oh, right, okay.
I'm a Firefox guy. Yeah, so now
And
now
I'm
we
an
can
amateur,
see
so.
now we can see what the to-do object is. Look what that value is 1. See them all. Nice.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, no problem.
Can you scroll down a little bit more to this Svelte file? This almost never happens, but I just want to test it. Scroll down to your HTML. Put a breakpoint to 85.
Ooh, yeah.
No, click one of your X buttons. No way.
Yeah,
That was-
man.
That was cool.
That was cool. You just wanted to see that breakpoint on the on-click handler worked.
So you actually, it's finding the JavaScript in your HTML. Recognizing it as JavaScript.
Yeah, that could be handy.
That's one major advantage over the other languages.
Can we hit that rainbow button a couple times and get into the fun?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, keep going.
You want to hit
You guys-
the button above your debugger pause, the yellow bar?
The down arrow with the dot underneath it.
Yeah, step in.
This one?
Yeah,
One over.
to the right.
Yeah. Click. Not sure what that did. Do it again. Yeah. What's an MJS file?
It's it's like an ES6 module that you run in Node, I think.
Gotcha.
Keep it in the rainbow.
The rainbow or the down arrow?
That one.
Rainbow?
Step over.
Step
That's
over?
what you need actually.
For this one, actually hit the up arrow. Yeah, that one, because I don't want to be in there. That's cool. Oh god. Oh, that's in. Yeah.
Content script.js.
Yeah.
Uh,
You just break out of that. Yeah, you have a
Oh, yeah, if
plugin.
you have the React plugin
Yep,
installed.
he does. There you go.
Alright.
Yeah, just let it run. Awesome. Remove the breakpoint on 85. Add it to 81. And add a new to do. Can we
See how many times it hits the breakpoint.
Yeah.
Down or over? Over?
Oh, remove this breakpoint too. Yeah, well,
The blue button.
Over?
yeah, just play it.
The blue.
Oh God. Hit play. That's your. That's what's in.
It's
Ah,
not.
didn't move through. Ah well. I was hoping for a lot there.
So, sorry, y'all. I'm a bit of a beginner. I'm sure it's obvious, but pretty awesome, right?
Yeah. So how many years have you been a professional software developer?
0.
Right. So in case anybody wants to know, anyone can give a talk. So,
Yeah.
because Tom, I think you've done a great job.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, let's move on.
Let's not take any compliments right now.
No, no compliments. Row, raggy. Oh, duh. Right. Oops. So this is a slide right from Svelte's website. It's who's using it. So a decent amount of companies. I mentioned before, I believe Rich Harris is a graphics editor for New York Times. So the New York Times uses it pretty extensively, as you might imagine. Also, you know, a lot of pretty big range of people using it. I don't know at all in what capacity or how much they use it. If it's for the entire site, just a small piece. As I mentioned, you can implement it just a piece at a time. I know Rich Harris in one of his talks has says that for data visualization pieces that he does with the Times, he'll bring it in for just that one piece, right, as needed. I was particularly interested in a situation I found on Twitter where, so this Stone company is a Brazilian company that does point of sale devices, and as you can probably read, they basically use Svelte as a user interface because it's so lightweight, and they have these low power devices, and it's really helped them down there. So I thought that was cool.
Well, that's actually a cool thing too. Those are really low powered devices running like almost like
Linux.
latest Chrome
A
and
capped version of
stuff,
Linux,
right?
yeah. And so it's incredibly performant, and
Yeah.
because it's so light, I think one of the reasons too is because once you have a browser installed, it's using all of the native APIs of the browser. You're not pulling all that stuff in.
Right. So I mean that really kind of poops on people still using IE8.
Yeah.
Even this low powered device can have a more modern browser than them.
Exactly. I mean, do we care about people using IE8?
I mean, they have a lot of money.
Also true. Also true.
I love how that POS acronym is beautifully ambiguous in this case. Point of sale or
That's also true.
How well is how well is the support for like service workers?
Service workers?
Yes.
Ooh, excellent question.
I saw this excellent blog where they use service workers to make the user experience on their part devices a lot more responsive.
Okay, so for the service worker piece, we're going to use something that is kind of coupled with Svelte called Sapper. Have you ever heard of Next.js
Yeah.
or Nuxt? So these are, so where, sorry guys, I gotta stand up. But, so Svelte and React and Vue can be thought of as UI frameworks, component frameworks. Sapper, Next, and Nuxt would be your application framework, right? So it has a lot more tools involved. And Sapper does have support for progressive web apps, which I believe part of the requisite is that they have service workers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
A little bit? Okay. Yeah, we're going to get into Sapper as well. So you guys look hungry for more.
There is pizza.
Where was I? We went over this. Yeah. So these are just the names of the VS Code plugins. You have Svelte, some snippets, and then some IntelliSense. So if you guys use VS Code, they're great. I know there's one too for Vim, and there's a whole site with a whole bunch of other tools. In researching this talk, like it seems like every week there was new stuff coming out as I was kind of piecing this together. It feels like there's a lot of momentum behind the framework. But here are some of those things that have been coming out. Right. So this is from a site called madewithsvelte.com, and it's got a couple things. I think I only really played around with the fusion charts in Svelte Fire, which uses Firebase. And I really want to check out the mind map. That looks really cool. And Svelte Movable is really interesting too. For somebody like Amelia Wattenberger, who does a lot of data visualization stuff, I think they would be interested in that. And then you got some other representation like Bulma, Font Awesome.
So these are like component libraries. that you
Exactly.
can pull into your-
Yeah, thank you. So these are component libraries and things that you can borrow and sort of piece together as you're building applications. A DevTools browser extension. Been meaning to try that as well.
Are you gonna show us an example of how you would do that? Pulling in a third party?
Yeah.
Sapper.
Yeah, Sapper would do that, but you don't need Sapper to do that though.
You just import it.
Yeah. So let's take a
So
look.
I'm assuming each one has a package, package.json, so you would add that to your dependencies.
Exactly. Yeah, you would add that to your dependencies, depending on which one it is. So here's, you notice from that list, Svelte Fire was on there, which talks to Google Firebase. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So we'll start with the package.json, and yeah, all the normal stuff. Svelte, prettier, and then the dependencies. The only thing that's really different from the template is Firebase, and then RxFire and RxJS. Serve CLI is part of the template, and that's how you would bring it in. This, if you've ever used Firebase, is almost exactly what Firebase gives you.
You're gonna want to change that
Okay.
API key.
What, you're gonna hack my API key?
I mean, it's recorded and gonna be on YouTube, so yes.
Touche.
So when it's importing, I just want to know, when it's importing Firebase from Firebase/app, that's actually assuming, that's shorthand, there's no modules in there as well, right?
So
So that's
Can you
imports Firebase from actually node modules, right?
from no modules,
Yeah.
yes.
That's just
But it
like
doesn't say.
ES6. That's just like.
Correct. Yeah, it doesn't specifically call out node modules for it. You're right. I think the import statement, and I don't think that that's unique to Svelte. I know Vue has a very similar syntax for importing stuff. And I want to say it's just
Yeah, I've seen it in
ES16.
Angular too, but I didn't know if it was specific to a framework or just ES6? That answers my question.
Okay.
Typically the build tools, so
Yeah.
like roll up,
Yeah.
you configure whether you need to use the path to the address.
Yeah, I gotta install ESLint locally. I don't think I did that. But yeah, that's the Firepace command, and then let's take a look at the actual app. So you import the top two there are just components. So we have a top component and for a profile per se, and then the actual to-do list. And then a similar sort of each down here, but it's a little bit different in that instead of an each block, we have an if block, just like an if statement, doing a lot of the same stuff. But it's checking, okay, is this guy logged in or is he not logged in? If he's not logged in, give him the option. If he is logged in, give him the option to log off. Right. And then it's bringing in these two components. So like I said, display the name, photo, little UID that Google has. Google's handling all the authentication here, and then that's something you set up with Firebase.
So what is the export doing in this file?
That's an excellent question. I'm really glad that you asked that. So the export here is allowing these variables, display name, photo URL, and UID, to be defined outside of this component, right? So you're basically passing props in for that. I think that's handled, yeah. So profile user is pulling that information in that.
Is that a spread operator that's happening on the user?
Mm-hmm.
The three dots?
Correct.
Like a spread, like explaining what user.
Sure is.
I had a question. Whenever you remove the to-do list, or a to-do list item, rather,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, where does that go? Maybe my question is very broad, but where does it go when you click that X?
It disappears. It hops on the snail with the frog and goes away. No, it's just deleted for good. Yeah, it's just blown up. It's not. Yeah, as far as I know.
There's a function that removes it from the array, right?
Right. But with this one, I bet we're removing it from the Firebase collection.
Correct.
Yeah.
We would be removing it from the collection directly.
Can you see to-dos.svelte?
Sorry?
Can you see to-dos.svelte?
So here's the to-do list. All right, so it's bringing in the data from Firebase. And then some helpers with RxJS and RxFire for the Firestore. And then that export let comes back to again allow that variable to be defined outside of this component.
Kind of like the opposite of generally how you use export. Export is like take the value from in here and send it out, but here it's
Yeah.
like allow others to send it into me.
Exactly, where that would break in React, I believe. Like
Well,
you wouldn't be able, you would have to set it up differently. So where React has 2A data binding, this is more of an assignment, and it lets you do it either way. It's my understanding. I saw error messages. Yay! Sweet. Oh. I'm in the wrong directory. Thank you.
Sorry, that's not driving me crazy. Export that UID, is that just exposing it to memory location then? So it's like a hard assignment or just have as a password? Just export use that basis.
profile stuff? I could be wrong.
That's what I figured, but I remember that, let's see if we can generate that.
I think exposing the property is gonna change that.
It's like module.exports equals an object where UID is one of the keys.
It should, what it
Okay,
spits out
that
is
makes
just the
sense.
functions.
So it's probably more like a destructor property of the class.
And it just lets you export anywhere in the file.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just weird seeing
Oh,
it
there you go.
initialized that way.
Right. My explanation was not great, admittedly. The Svelte API docs, much better. And as you can see, it does. It lets you sort of do that outside of the component is my kind of dumbed down understanding of it. But yeah,
It's a nice shorthand, export const and things like that for read onlys.
So I went like from outside how you access that value, because it's just like it's a prompt that you're passing in, so can you like bind it to a value, but like instead of UID equals a value that you're passing in, you do UID equals like some variable, and then the UID from inside is getting set outside, and it kind of changes the directions of the data flow.
Yeah, what's the
My
access?
assumption is it only goes one way. I'd be curious.
That would be my assumption as well, but like what's the value of export const otherwise?
I think it does go both ways. So my understanding of it is during the compilation step, Svelte is building out a dependency graph of how all the variables are interacting with each other. And that's why it doesn't have virtual DOM or any of that different stuff going on. It knows when you change a variable that it needs to invalidate its state, and it's going to go through and it, because of that dependency tree, knows which parts of the app.
So is that
change
how
the
state
variable.
management happens in general between components?
In Svelte, yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's cool.
So when you're saying export let UID or whatever, that's letting the compiler know that this UID can be possibly used elsewhere within the app, and it's helpful in building that dependency.
Yeah. And I mean, if you consider reusability of components an important thing, I think that's a really good part of that too. Take a quick look at what this is. Oh, I'm logged in. So, like I said, if you're not logged in, it doesn't show you anything. Once you authenticate with Google, crushing that Wi-Fi. Sorry, Sean.
What's the password again?
Yeah. and so these are saved too, right? So I can delete. Well, I won't delete them. You just mark them as done. Log out. Log in. Sorry, I'm pushing the Wi-Fi. Point made, right? Yeah. So let's how do we start down in this rabbit hole? Oh, yeah, that's how you pass in like outside dependencies. Bring them in kind of the same way. They integrate pretty nicely. And there's, like I said, this is just a small couple that I grabbed that I think people would maybe recognize some of the stuff like Bulma and the charting libraries and stuff. Sapper. So, hang tight. I just wanted to grab some notes I had them on here. There they are. No. Okay. So I think I mentioned this before, but where Svelte is sort of a UI framework, Sapper is your application framework, and it's the it's Sapper is to Svelte, what Next is to React, or Nuxt is to Vue, and it basically takes all of this stuff and lets you build larger scale applications with it. There's some downsides to Svelte too, like out of the box it doesn't come with a router. You have to bring one in, or you have to use Sapper for that. Which, you know, depending on what you want to do. And they do have a library for a router already, so it's not like you can't bring one in easily enough. It's just out of the box, not there. One thing that I thought was really neat is that it has started using Svelte native, which uses native script to build applications with. And that's not something I'm really too familiar with doing, but I was able to basically stand up an application, download the app to my phone, and develop it in real time. And you guys probably by now have an understanding of what my level is of proficiency, so that's saying a lot, right? Really neat stuff. And then also very recently they started working on SvelteGL and this pancake charts, which is made by Rich Harris as well, which is like a charting library with Svelte, but the trick is that it's doing all this in CSS. So I thought that was pretty impressive. And I'll just show you a couple examples of what they had. Again, this is not in production anywhere. There's still, it's an experimental library is what he referred to it as. And notice you have the same hoodie. So I bought it just for this talk. Some guy from Australia sent it to me. I thought it was pretty awesome. And that's him wearing it too, so I felt kind of neat, kind of cool. Let's do some more demos. So I think I mentioned I'm not a professional developer if it's not painfully obvious. So let me give you an idea of how a non-professional might just sort of use something like this to do work. So I work for a small crane company out in Victor. Corbell. Thank you. Familiar?
Go there.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
8 years ago.
Come back. We're hiring. But in working there, I'm a customer service team leader, and because it's a small company, you get to wear a lot of different hats, which is something that I like. And as a team leader, I'm responsible for the team doing well and being quick and efficient. And sometimes spreadsheets don't have everything that you want and can do. So you might build something like this. Now I've done this before. I put some fun names on there because you get bored when you develop stuff for yourself that no one else sees. So that's why. But I just wanted to point to a couple things on how this might be used. So again, as a crane guy, if you will, I have to do a lot of calculations all day, and it's painful to just do this. So these really just help me do my job quickly and efficiently and have a conversation kind of in real time, where sometimes you might have to, okay, let me work something up and I'll give you a call back. But there's delays, and salesmen are hard to reach sometimes. They have meetings. If you can do it quickly, I'll never forget one of the guys, you might know him, David Budwit. He was the VP there when I started. He's since retired. He told me 50% of the time, the first person to get the quote gets the sale. And it's true. And this helps me get the quote to that person quicker. So let's take a look at what it's actually doing. This is all one component. I think I went to the docs a moment ago, and you may have seen this $sign. So this $sign is what's referred to as a labeled statement in JavaScript. And what Svelte's doing is it's a bit magical. They're kind of stealing this labeled statement and using it for an unintended purpose, which is to make it reactive, and kind of it gets rid of this dot impact, this dot hoist weight. You know what? Let's do this. I have the same thing built in Vue, and I think this will paint the picture pretty well. Okay. So if you guys are familiar with Vue, you'll see I have all these variables being watched so that when I upload some of those inputs to do calculations, it's taking those inputs and redoing the calculation every single time. Right? Where Svelte kind of does it in a different way. And then I'm just, some instances, calculating right on the fly in here, and binding the value, this bind operator, right? And again, we're not going to win any prizes for being a beautiful user interaction or anything like that, but that helps me and saves me time every day, and for me that's enough. Right? If that's all I ever learn how to do, it's been helpful. So I plan to do more than that, but take it for what it's worth. And now I'd like to move on to, whoops. So you know what? Let's do something fun. Anybody seen the new Edge browser yet? Exactly. Frink. Totally different. Totally different thing. No, it's the same. But you can install it as a PWA. It's kind of cool. It's not unique to Edge. It just.
It's in your taskbar.
How do I get there? So this is a really fun page. Let's go through some of this stuff about reactivity and how it's doing that. So we have that count there. It's handling the click. Pretty neat. And again, right in the REPL, this is all on the website, right? So all of this, I can turn dev mode on, make it server-side rendered if I want to. Where it gets pretty interesting is, and you see all the different blocks. We went over the if block and the each block. There's also the, oops, if else, await blocks for those that do promises. It's probably everybody. Yes. Like I said, all of these things just come out of the box, which you'd probably expect. What you might not expect out of the box is stuff like this. Now this to-do list might look similar. Is that it's not mind-bendingly different or complex, but that's kind of the point, is that it's not terribly complex to get results. And they're always adding new stuff to this. This is a new one that I hadn't seen before. today. Actually,
Is that the JS output tab, is that the actual bundle file?
that's the compiled file. Yeah, so this is what it's compiling down to, right here.
So it's bundle JS.
Well, I have dev mode on, but
So
now
the
yes.
D3 interpolate, that's not a Svelte specific node module, is it?
That's D3
Okay, so
JS.
Svelte doesn't come out of the box with this, but that's just, it works with this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Correct. Yeah. So we're importing some D3 there. Right.
At least the interpolating string part, but the Svelte motion, all the animations are still Svelte.
Exactly. All the animation directives.
Oh, okay, so the easing part, okay, that's.
Exactly. And that's all done as well.
What, the route management, like client-side route management, the URL changing?
Yeah, there's no router out of the box. So for that, you have to bring in, and there is one with Sapper, but there is a router that you can bring in, Svelte router, I think is the name of the repo. But out of the box, yeah, it doesn't have the router.
Which is the same as React Vue.
And then this animate directive that we talked about, but all sorts of little transitions too. I know React, I don't believe, has any real CSS to speak of out of the box. So that's one of the areas where it's a bit different. And we talked about that class director, I think, earlier on. How you can have multiple shorthand classes, right? And you just sort of check on off. Okay, pretty simple. Oh, one thing that I somehow failed to mention is slots. So in the component, say you want to at some point put more HTML or something else inside of the component, you can set up something called a slot where basically declare that something's going to be input here. Right? So this is the box component that it's importing, and in the box component you just put a slot saying that we're going to add some stuff. I don't know what that stuff is right now, but I know that I'm going to add some stuff. Or even if you don't, you can. It's not going to break it if you don't have anything there either, right? So that might be helpful if you're, say, adding things to a cart. Leave the cart empty, but if you do that stuff, it'll show up there. And there was one thing. This is pretty fun as well. So it's about 8:30. Do you guys have any questions? Anything you want to see? I'm happy to go over some more demos here, examples in the REPL.
Tom, I just think that's pretty cool that you made that piece for the workplace. I mean, if I look back like 5 years, somebody just beginning, you know, like yourself, that'd be really difficult for them to accomplish. I don't know, I think that's cool. And obviously, you know, you put a lot of effort into, you know, learning it, you know, and getting to where you are. And now you're teaching us. It's great.
I appreciate you saying that. I would definitely say that term teaching is a little bit loose. I think we crowdsourced it tonight with the help of the docs here, but that's really nice of you to say that. Appreciate it. And use Svelte.